to start over with, there we go. We're going to start over with introduction and then work our way to the left. If you hit references, you've gone too far, you need to back up a little bit. And like I said, you can add comments under each of these little things here, and you can revise your comments and you can see everybody else's. So if you want to take a second to just get situated on Padlet, get that working okay, I will talk a little bit about reading in general. So when we read, most of us are translating from a written system of meaning to a spoken system of meaning, or from graphemes to phonemes. This is not the case for everybody, but generally that's how it works. We typically like sand out the words in our heads as we're reading, right? That in and of itself is a process of translation, and it gets easier or harder depending on how familiar we are with the words themselves. So if you are a new college student entering into college, all of the words are going to start getting more difficult. That whole translation process can slow down and can get just harder in general. We can also read in different ways and for different processes and for different purposes. Sorry. We can read actively or passively, right? If I'm reading a novel, I probably don't want to think about the text itself. I'm trying to like tune out the authorial voice and just get sucked into the words. If I'm reading a textbook or a research article, I might be constantly asking myself questions about the text, trying to check in, make sure I understand the information, maybe pay attention to how that author is actually writing out their thing. It's a very active reading process, whereas reading a novel is maybe a little bit more passive. And we can read for different things. We can read to understand the content. We can read for style or craft. In English classes, you get a lot of like rhetorical analysis assignments, which is asking students to pay attention not just to what a writer is saying, but how they're saying it. That's reading for craft, right? And we can read to understand specific information or to find specific information instead of trying to get it all understood more broadly. These are just a couple options. There's lots of different ways. If there's one takeaway I hope this presentation leaves you with, it's that reading is not just one thing. It's a set of different tools and techniques that can be learned, and we should not assume that every student knows how to be an effective reader. Oftentimes, this kind of view of reading is not explicitly taught. Students might be taught how to do close reading, or they might be taught how to do one thing, but they don't necessarily have those tools already. So in the description for this Padlet up here, you can see kind of the form that this presentation will take. We're going to do one section talking about how to help students read and interpret homework questions and prompts. And then we'll look at how to approach reading just really difficult material, textbooks and research articles and that sort of thing. So we can move on to the next little header that says reading prompts and questions. Underneath that is a little green sticky note. And this is our first little interactive practice activity here. This question here, explain the 3 ways in which the world revolution of Westernization identified by Von Liao in the passage disrupted non-Western societies. So this is a pretty general homework prompt that might require like an essay response. What I want you to do is jump into that little comment section just here on this green sticky. And how would you approach this question? What might you choose to analyze? What might you choose to annotate? What parts of this question might you focus in on? Okay. Okay, and if nobody has any ideas, that is A-okay, because we haven't really gone over this yet. When we're reading questions like this, I'm going to pop up first this first little set of PowerPoint slides. We want to pay attention to a couple different kinds of words. The first one is going to be any words that give directions. So in this example here, construct and predict are those words that give you the direction, the form that your answer is actually supposed to take. In that other green one, it's explain We're looking out for vocabulary terms. These are maybe the learning goals of the question, but we actively want the student to be learning by filling out this question. In this case, it's asking them to know what a scatter plot is and know how to predict correlation. So those are those vocabulary terms. And then the last part is any words or phrases that might change the kind of answer you're expected to give. These are those tricky words, things like which of the following except, which of the following is not. Or in this case, this why part is asking you to expand on this second prediction thing. So going back to this little practice question, oh, now I'm seeing some responses. Yeah, so 3 ways is important. Oops. 3 ways is important because that's how many things you need to have in your answer. That identified as important, explain, all of that stuff. So when we're annotating questions, we want to pay attention to these kind of words. Our next step is, and these are those direction words to watch out for: predict, construct, explain, analyze. These words can be very confusing to students. A word like analyze is pretty broad. It's a little hard to know what that's wanting you to do. Things like discuss. How do you describe something versus summarize something? How do you compare something versus summarize something? These are tricky. So our next step would be to figure out what kind of question this is. And I am taking this information from Dr. Ruth Schoenbach, who put together a way of understanding questions that fall into categories depending on how much they want you to rely on an existing text versus your own information. Okay, that'll make more sense in a second here. She puts together 4 different kind of questions, depending on how much you're supposed to bring your own information into it. So the first one she calls right there questions. These are questions where the answer is in the text, you can point to it. So definition questions. In this case, it's asking you which of the following laws fits this definition, right? This is something that you can put your finger on in a textbook. You don't need to bring your own information. It's right there. The next one she calls pulling it together questions. So these are questions that ask students to summarize information from a text or to pull together different bits and pieces from a reading and put it together. So in this case, what 3 things contributed to the origins of sociology as a distinct discipline? These 3 things you would expect to find like in that sociology textbook. They just have to locate them and pull them together. So some of those direction words that might pop up with this are rank, consider, summarize, list, those kind of things. Okay. The next one are a little bit more complicated, text and me questions. Most homework prompts kind of fall under this category. And these are ones that you take something from the text and then you have to bring your own information in and expand on it. So it's a combination of something directly from a textbook or from a reading and your own information. There's a couple examples here. Things like discuss, compare, describe, explain. Those kind of direction words tend to mean you're looking at this kind of a question. Okay. And the last one are on my own questions. These are questions that you don't have supplied materials. You're either answering it just from what you know, or you're bringing in your own research to answer the question. So things like argue and analyze typically mean this kind of question. These are what most standard essay prompts for standardized tests are, is you're bringing in your own information. Most research projects, big research projects, are this as well, where you don't have text supplied, you have to go find that yourself. All right, so those are kind of her 4 main categories of questions. Whether or not you remember these specific names, not as important as the idea of questions ask us to bring in different information on our own versus finding stuff in a text. Okay, so back up in our little Padlet under the next section that says practice activity. There's a big speech bubble that says time to practice. Underneath that, there is one more question. So I'm going to ask you again to hop into that comment section on Padlet. And with some of that information, I know I went over it quickly. We just went through, try to annotate this question and try to identify what kind of a question it might be.
may I ask a question? This is just
Yes.
one of my first times using Padlet. How do we like highlight? Because I saw somebody else do that.
I'm not super sure. If anybody has the answer to that, feel free to go for it. If not, you can just list whatever words you're pointing to.
Awesome. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, how do we get onto Padlet?
Yes, there should be a link in the chat. It might have just been a bit. And if you click that link, it should open up to Padlet.
Got it.
Okay, so we're seeing, I see a response here. Yeah, identify is definitely that direction word. That's the kind of form we're asking for the question. There's also that disprove in the middle of that question is one of those sneaky words that's changing the nature of the answer you're getting. And yeah, Liz, you're making a good point here as well, that it's always good to paraphrase any words that you don't understand. So I want to give people another minute or so with that. Okay, and does anybody see any important vocab words in this question? That's maybe what the learning goal of the question itself is. Yep, I'm seeing rhetorical strategy there highlighted. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so I'm seeing a couple different responses here, and you guys are doing a great job. I think rhetorical strategies is maybe the learning goal of this question. What we're asking the student to know in this case is what a rhetorical strategy might be, and we're asking them to identify one. Okay, so they are on one hand like pointing to something in the text. They do need to bring in their own side of like rhetorical strategies is pretty broad. So they'd need to know, okay, do I want to try to look at an appeal to ethos or pathos or logos or something like that? So this is a question that's asking for a combination of I'm pointing to something in the text and I'm bringing in my own knowledge of what kind of rhetorical strategies I might decide to focus on. Okay, so it's sort of a combination question. A little bit tricky. Again, less important that you can identify what kind of question it is than we're able to help students kind of think through how these questions are phrased and what it might be asking them to do. So I'm going to move on in a minute here to just talking about reading difficult material broadly. I did want to do a little Q&A section for this first part of the presentation in case anybody has questions about this stuff here.
Just a clarifying question, Emery. Do you think it's a good idea to teach students to look? You're getting at not only the tutors noticing those those key words, but for the students to also notice them and then delineate what they're reading for.
Yeah. So if you as the tutor are sort of doing this work for the student, you might be helping them understand that one question. But if the goal is really to help students know how to read these sorts of questions and sort of do this work on their own, then practicing identifying those direction words or identifying what the learning goal of the question is or what kind of question it is will help students be able to kind of interpret questions that might be really intimidating to look at when you first see them, and sort of work through it on their own as well. So good point, Liz. Thanks for bringing that up. Anyone else? Okay, if not, I'm going to move on to the second part, and that's just sort of how do we read difficult material? So under the little heading, reading difficult material, there's another little PowerPoint. And I think I forgot to mention last time, let me move all the heads over here. For each of these PowerPoints and anything in this Padlet, if you go to the little ellipses, when you click on it, you have the option to download any of the attachments in this presentation for personal use. Absolutely feel free if you want to save any of this material to do that. You've got my okay on it. Just want to make sure you know how to. Okay. So if we're talking reading more broadly, so a student has a section of a textbook assigned, or they have to do some research on their own, or oftentimes students are asked to do research that involves academic journals or peer-reviewed journals for the first time in college, and they have to sort of read through those. That's very difficult reading. So what makes college reading really difficult? Students are learning how to enter into a new community of language and conversation. As I mentioned at the beginning, reading is a translation process between written language and spoken language, or what we're more familiar with. And that's easier and faster the more we recognize the words. So if you're not recognizing any of the words that you're reading, that process slows down and it gets trickier and trickier. And oftentimes in college, students are entering into groups of conversations that they just haven't been exposed to before. So it's just automatically a little bit more difficult. Close reading, which I'll talk about in a minute, is sort of the one kind of reading that does get taught to students. This is the kind of reading where you sit down and you annotate and you underline words you don't understand and you take notes and you ask yourself questions. That's close reading. And that is a stamina activity. It requires a lot of attention and it requires a lot of time, and expecting students to jump in on page 1 of 40 and do that all the way through is a big ask, okay? And finally, reading does tend to be a presumed skill rather than a taught skill, especially different kinds of reading strategies. So all these things make college reading really difficult. But what can make it easier? And one thing is to know what you're expecting to learn from a text before you begin. Okay, we're not reading a novel here. It's a-okay if we spoil it for ourselves. It's good to have a general sense of, oh, my teacher's asking me to read this textbook because I should be learning this thing. Or if you're doing a research project, I'm choosing to read this article because I need information about this thing. So having that kind of question or learning goal in mind before you start makes it easier. Also makes it less likely that you get lost in the weeds, so to speak. Similar is to have keywords or key ideas in mind. Keywords is one of those things that comes up a lot in English classrooms and in research and stuff. And that's basically another version of knowing what you're expecting to learn from a text. Just, I'm on the lookout for these key ideas. These are the ones that if I learn nothing else, I want to take away information about this, okay? And then the final point, scanning, skimming, and close reading are different skills. Learning when and how to use them ensures you're prioritizing the most important material and that you're not getting totally burnt out trying to close read just a bunch of pages. Okay, so let's talk about those three. We use skimming and scanning, and I promise you I'm going to get those two confused at least once in this presentation. We use that to narrow down where the information we need is located within a reading and to get a general sense of what we can expect to learn. Okay, and then we use close reading to make sure we understand the most relevant information. And when we're doing research, especially, Skimming and scanning helps us determine if a source is a good fit for our project without having to read the whole thing in depth first. Students who are new to research will sort of jump on the databases, download the first 5 things that pop up, try to read through all of it, and realize that they don't have a particularly coherent set of articles. You can't expect students to do that. They need to learn how to prioritize which of those articles to read first. Okay, and scanning and skimming are going to help us do that. So scanning is exactly what it sounds like. We're looking at the title, headers, bolded words. If we're looking in a textbook, this might mean looking at chapter headings and then skipping over headers. The goal here is to get a general map of where different information is located within the reading. Okay, and then skimming within a scholarly article, we're just kind of looking through, very quickly reading through certain headings. So abstract, introduction, and discussion are going to have the most, let's sum it up for you kinds of information. Skip anything that's data, methods, research, processes. Those are going to have more of the like nitty gritty of it. It's not going to give you a general sense of the article. And especially for undergraduate students, these sections are written by and for professionals in the field. The chances that an undergraduate student is really going to understand these sections is pretty low anyways, because it's not written at that level. Inside of a textbook, the skimming might look like a student attended class and there were 3 new math concepts and they really felt like they got the first 2, but not the third. So they're going to use scanning and skimming to figure out which parts of the textbook just talk to that third thing that they didn't quite understand. Okay. So again, lengthy PowerPoint, a lot of information. We're going to jump on here and do a little practice. And I'm choosing to look at academic articles for this because that's maybe the most difficult kind of reading that we ask students to do. Textbooks are at least sort of written for the level that it's teaching. These are written at a level above where we can realistically expect undergraduate students to be. Okay. So this lovely article here is on fungal microbiology, and it is very intimidating. So it's 12 pages long. It's got tiny, dense text. It's got really long paragraphs. There's a whole bunch of acronyms. There's a bunch of graphs. Just looking through this, it's very intimidating, right? And what we don't want students to do is, let's say a student's doing a research project on fungus living in extreme environments. We would not want that student to download this paper, start at word 1, and try to read the whole thing through doing that close reading. Okay. Instead, we're going to practice scanning first. So underneath that, there's one here that says scanning. Scanning is going to look something like this. Okay. We're focusing just in on titles, headers. A lot of academic articles have a list of keywords here. And we're just trying to get a general sense of where different things are located inside this article. So you can see there's an abstract, there's an introduction, there's a methodology section, there's a results section, there's a discussion section, there's a little declaration, and then there's a section of references. Okay. So that just gives us a general sense of what is in the article and where we might find it. So from there, we can move on to skimming. And here we're just skimming, reading quickly through sections that we've identified as containing the big ideas. So that abstract is a good one. Abstracts are always helpful. The introduction section, and then we're going to skip over anything methodology, anything results, anything data, down to our discussion. And we're going to just skim from there. Okay. And when we're skimming, we're looking at the individual words, right? If we come across words that we don't understand, like I don't know what a localized steep abiotic gradient is, I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'm just going to note that there was something I didn't know and move on. Okay. And this is where our keywords might come in handy. So if we're interested in fungus growing in extreme environments, we're going to keep a lookout for the word extreme while we're skimming. Skimming is easier to do if you're looking for what you do know than if you're looking for what you don't know. Okay. So we just skim through it and try to figure out is this article going to actually be helpful for my project? Does it have the information I need? And if the answer is no, put it aside and find something else. If the answer is yes, then we can move on to doing close reading. I'm not going to go over that one today because that's the one that students tend to know how to do the best. I did want to show you one more little trick here. It's Control F. You can use Control F to search for words on online documents. So this works on PDFs, this works on online articles, all of that. So if we click on our big one here, if you hit Control F, you get a little search bar. We could search for just the word extreme. Oh, we got 6 hits. So this word pops up 6 times. One of them is in the abstract. And then we can kind of scroll through. This is talking about extreme environments in the introduction. And it pops up quite a few times in these last 2 big paragraphs of the introduction. Okay. So when we went to do a close reading, these 2 paragraphs might be a really good place to start. Because we kind of, using those keywords, we know that that might be the best place that has that information that we're interested in. So that's a lot of, a lot of talking from me. I want to give you guys a chance to practice. So I'm going to set a timer for about 5 minutes or so. I want you to take 2 minutes to look at these 2 sample papers, scan through them, skim through them, and then with a little heart, vote on which one you think would be a better fit for this research question, which is ways to improve college student reading comprehension. So take a couple minutes, skim and scan through these, and then try to determine which one would be better or which one you should prioritize reading for that research question. Okay, that's about half the time. And as you're making your decisions on which of those articles you might choose to prioritize, you can hit like to vote on them. You can also leave a quick comment with some of your reasoning if you want to. And we'll take a minute to kind of talk over this in a second here as well. Okay, take maybe 20 more seconds or so. And it looks like by and large, people are saying that sample number 2, the second one, is the one that we might choose to read first. People who voted that, does anybody have a reason why you decided to prioritize this one? I'm seeing one in the chat here, a couple. Seems like it's more focused. It might use some of those more keywords and terms. Or does anybody have a reason that you decided against this first sample?
I put my reasoning on there as well, but my main thing was when I was reading through the first article, it wasn't, in my opinion, focused on college students reading. It was more focused on faculty and then potentially using the improvement in faculty understanding and pedagogy to help students, whereas the second one was directly talking about and focusing on students and how we can use these ideas and concepts to help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's definitely a big difference between these two articles. And that one does pop up even just in the title here, where this one is explored from faculty perspective, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But this one's focused on college students' perspective. So if we're really focused on how can we help students improve, that might be a point in the second sample's favor there. Does anybody else have any other reasons or anything else that they noticed?
I noticed something in the second article.
Yeah, go for it.
So there's a subheading where it says consumption. And one student wrote, academic reading in college is like drinking water after a run. The more you read, the more information you retain, especially in college. So that's a very good metaphor. And it's really, this article is more from the student's perspective.
Yeah.
And so it's relatable.
Yeah. And I think too, because the second sample has a bunch of those sections where it's kind of taking students' words there. If you were writing up a research article, this one might provide a lot more support. So stuff that's very quotable, stuff that's easy to integrate with your own ideas, those kind of things. Whereas this one is, again, faculty perspective, and it's got some good things, but it's a little bit less student focused. Okay. So are there any other questions about that little practice activity? I have one more section here of just some different accessibility tools I wanted to run through, but that kind of sums up the main presentation there. So if there's any other questions about reading strategies, anything like that. Okay, and this Padlet will stay up for a little bit. Feel free to download samples, save any of the PowerPoint slides, anything like that that you want to use, and it'll stay up a bit if you want to revisit it. This last section here just has a couple free tools that I've found to be very useful and have used with students before. And I just want to run through what those are and how they might be helpful. reading is one of those things that assumes a couple things about a student. So for instance, generally when we're assigning reading, we're assuming that students don't have learning differences such as dyslexia. We might be assuming that students are not English language learning students. We might assume that their first language is English. And we might also assume that they are not first generation students. So they have been exposed to academic words in the home versus this is their first kind of exposure to it. So these are just a couple free things that can help kind of level that playing field for students who might be in one of those minority groups or others. This first one, Helper Bird, is an extension. I'm going to say it right off the bat. This is free. All of these are free. It has a free version for students that lets students adjust font type and size for online things. They should not have to pay anything. There is an option for schools to get this. If you decide that this looks like a kind of thing that would be helpful for your school, you could maybe advocate for that, but it's completely free. I have this extension installed, so I'll show you what it can do. Here's just a little example article here from the Washington Post, right? By and large, this is pretty nice to read. The font might be a little small for some students, and it's not particularly dyslexic friendly. So if you turn on, I have to move the little faces down. If you turn on this thing, what it'll let you do is choose the font and alter it. And it has a couple dyslexic friendly fonts pre-installed. So what that's going to look like is this. Dyslexic friendly fonts have different weight on the bottom versus the top of letters so that it's harder to mentally flip them around in your head. This also gives you the option to mess around with the text size. If it's too small and that's hard for students, it can let you do that. You can mess with word spacing, letter spacing, line height. All of these are totally free with this. There's a lot of other fancy things if you pay for it, but being able to change the font is completely free. Okay, oops. So that is what Helper Bird does. This next one here, Natural Readers. This is an online text-to-speech thing. So what this does, and it also has a dyslexia-friendly font option here. What this does is it lets you, I need this to go away for a second. There you go. It lets you listen to the words read out loud. So let's just copy over this first part of our article here. You can change it to a dyslexic-friendly font if you want. And you can play it, and it's going to read it out loud.
Every few months, the great student segment of the internet gets up and on about whether.
I have the text speed set really fast because I read really fast, but you can change the reading speed of that as well. That's right here. You change it slow.
Every few months, the great student segment of the internet gets up in arms about whether sugar belongs in the dish.
It also has a bunch of different speakers that you can choose. There's US English, UK English. If students are reading through texts in other languages, they do have speakers that will read it in that language as well. Spanish and French, Portuguese, German, Italian, Dutch, and Swedish. And it displays that down at the bottom there. So one way to use this is it does make it easier if you can hear the words being said out loud, especially if for English language learner students, they might be better at recognizing words verbally than they are seeing them written. The other thing that I use this for is you can change the reading speed to match your reading speed, play it, and then follow along while you're hearing the words. And it can help you pay better attention to the text and sort of retain more information. Okay, so that's another little free tool there. And then this last one I wanted to show you is called Rewordify. And what this is sort of, keep getting this pop up here, this is sort of a combination dictionary and thesaurus that replaces words based on sentence and paragraph context. Okay, so it has a little example here, but like Liz, you had pointed out with some of those practice questions that like enfeebled is a really tricky kind of weird word. And what this will do, let's just paste that in here, is it will replace any words that are kind of unnecessarily difficult. So this first one, it replaced the word segment with part or section. It also has a verbal thing, so you can listen to what that replaced word sounds like. Okay. It's replaced perhaps with maybe, shaming, or dare with who, risk, shaming with making someone feel guilty and embarrassed. And if you click on any of these highlighted things, it'll tell you what it replaced. And you can also, if you make an account, it'll save a list of words so you can kind of like run through them and learn them. Rewordify works best with sentences. So we could put in single words on here. We could just put in simplify, right? And it will give you something. Oh, if it can. Blanking on any complicated words right here, but you can put in a single word and it will replace it. It works best within the context of sentences and paragraphs. The biggest downside to this is there's no way to direct copy text over, so you do have to either copy paste it or retype it. You can't like upload a document into here. But it's a free little thing that is very helpful. And it definitely beats having to look up individual words in the dictionary and kind of like put those meanings together yourself and then put it back in the context of a sentence. So those are just 3 little free things. There's lots of tools like that out there, and I highly recommend people go and look for them. It might not be helpful for every student, but knowing that they exist is always a good thing. So that is what I've got for this presentation. The last thing on here is a lovely reference section. So if there are any other questions about that, I know we covered a lot of information and I tend to talk pretty quickly. So I wanted to leave a good bit of time for questions. Okay, the one that can read texts in different languages, that's that natural readers. So the second one here, and the way you get it to do that, it won't read the English into Spanish, but if you have Spanish that you're copying in here, they have readers in here that the voice itself reads Spanish words out and is sort of has the intonation to do that. Any other questions? Yeah, so natural readers has pretty good pronunciation, and some of the different voices have different, again, accents and things. So these different voices, like Gail, will pronounce stuff differently.
Drag and drop your file.
So the pronunciation isn't perfect, but it can help with that. And that's, again, where sort of reading along while listening to someone say the words can help with that as well. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, again, all of this stuff will stay up on the Padlet for a while. You're free to download anything. I know we covered a lot of information today, but I hope at least some of it was helpful and that you got some chance to practice some of these techniques. Okay, I guess I'll go ahead and stop sharing this then.
Sorry, here I've been talking away and my microphone's been muted this whole time. I'm so sorry. Yeah.
You're okay.
Yeah. So thank you, Emery. Judging by the responses in the chat, everyone really found a great deal of value in your presentation today. Thank you for your preparation, your research. This was really interesting. We'd like to take a picture of the participants in the session. So if you would, I'd like to invite everyone to turn their camera on while I do that. And also invite anyone who has not yet added their name and institution into the chat to go ahead and do that for attendance purposes. All right, and I see people primping. Here we go with the, we're going to capture that image. Oh, I guess I'll turn mine on too here. So there we go. All right, 3, 2, 1. All right, thank you. Okay, we do have the 4th session coming up in looks like a little over 10 minutes. We encourage you to continue and to join us for that. Again, sign in the chat, and also please fill out the survey, the evaluation, the session form. I will drop that in the chat as well. If I can, my window just went away. There we go. Okay, so here's the link to the session evaluation form. Please take a moment to fill that out, and we'll see you in session 4.